Allow me to explain the title for this presentation. I have called this video our Nuts and Bolts session because it contains a lot of the fundamental aspects of working in and with an EL program in a public school setting. In addition, you will see throughout this presentation that there's actually no typical EL program. The programmatic decisions for each school and district are based on a myriad of factors, including EL population, staffing concerns, and funding. By the end of this session, you should be able to answer the following questions. What acronyms are acceptable and appropriate to describe ELs? What is the representation of ELs in Minnesota and the US, particularly in content classes? How is EL education funded? As content area teachers and EL teachers, how do we talk about our ELs? What language is appropriate? How does an EL enter and exit an EL program? Who teaches ELs and how is their content delivered? And finally, what additional support is available to serve our ELs? As you can tell, there's a lot to discuss, so let's get started. First, let's talk about acronyms, because they matter. There are two main terms used to describe these learners and the EL program itself. They are EL, or English Learner, and MLL, or Multilanguage Learner, or Multilingual Learner. Although English Learner is the term most commonly used in public schools, some districts have decided to employ other acronyms since the term English Learner can imply a deficit in language, one who is still learning a language. For example, in the St. Paul public school system, the term MLL is used for both those who are learning English as an additional language, as well as for native English speakers who are learning a world language, such as Spanish or Mandarin. So in this context, the term MLL is more universal and unifying. For this presentation, however, and throughout this course, I will use the term EL to describe both the learner and the program. There are three other acronyms which we must address. They describe subsets of our EL population. First is our SLIFE students, or students with limited or interrupted formal education. These are students who meet three of the following 5 requirements: speaks a language other than English at home, or usually speaks a language other than English, entered school in the United States after grade 6, has at least 2 years less schooling than their US native peers, performs at least 2 years below grade level in reading and mathematics, and is potentially pre-literate in their native language. A second subset of ELs is our LTEL students, or our long-term English learners. These are students who have been enrolled in American schools for more than 6 years, who are not progressing toward English proficiency, and who are struggling academically due to their limited English skills. This category represents the majority of ELs. Third, we have our RAEL students, or our recently arrived English learners. These are English learners who have been enrolled in US schools for less than 12 months, regardless of their language level. So, students could actually be almost exiting the EL program and still be considered a RAEL. The state of Minnesota is currently wanting to quantify our learners, and so they are asking schools for documentation on who their ELs are. A positive side to this task is that in reporting this information to the Minnesota Department of Education, it causes the EL staff to think of their students in different lights. In other words, all ELs are not created equal. A SLIFE student and a highly educated RAEL student and an LTEL student are all incredibly different. Now, how many ELs do we have in Minnesota and in the United States? You might be wondering, how relevant is this topic? Will I have ELs in my classroom? Well, the answer is yes, or at least extremely likely. There are about 5 million ELs enrolled in the public school system in the US, and about 75,000 enrolled in Minnesota schools alone. That is about 8.5% of our total enrollment in Minnesota. Our EL population is robust here in Minnesota, and it is important to be aware that this population is growing. Perhaps it is most important to note that since 2012, the number of identified English learners has continued to rise at a faster rate than total enrollment. As you can see here, the upper Midwest, including Minnesota, is a hotbed for this growth. And more than 100 different languages are represented among our diverse EL populations. After English, the most common languages spoken by our ELs are Spanish, Somali, Hmong, and Karen. This means that both EL staff and content area teachers must make their English comprehensible in order to teach such a diverse population. Now, why are there so many ELs in Minnesota, you may wonder? Well, the adage of Minnesota nice might be applicable in this situation. In comparison to other states, Minnesota has an extensive network of refugee resettlement programs which provide the resources and stable foundation refugees need in order to rebuild their lives, achieve their highest potential, and contribute to our state. So next, how do we pay for all of these learners? The primary responsibility in meeting the needs of ELs lies with the school districts. Hence, in addition to the revenue that every Minnesota child in public education generates, English learners also generate supplementary aid. Funding for English learners primarily comes from 3 different resources: local agencies, which is a combination of property taxes and referendums, the state, which is a combination of collected income and sales taxes, and federal revenue, a combination of federal income tax and other sources. This is important funding to secure, especially since we just noted that the number of ELs enrolled in Minnesota public schools has increased compared to the total number of students enrolled. In larger districts like Minneapolis and St. Paul, a full-time EL coordinator will manage funding, but the EL teachers themselves must deal with funding issues in smaller school districts. So we must be knowledgeable about funding in order to advocate for grants. For example, it's important to understand the designation of Rael, since these recently arrived ELs might generate additional dollars via immigrant grants. So next, how do we, both content area teachers and EL teachers, talk about these students? Well, we have a common language, and that common language is called WIDA. The WIDA Consortium is a member-based organization made up of U.S. states, territories, and federal agencies, which is dedicated to the research, design, and implementation of a standards-based system for our K-12 ELs. This organization provides tools to help educators teach and assess the ELs in their schools. The 5 ELD standards published by WIDA connect language to different content areas. They are Standard 1, language for social and instructional purposes; Standard 2, language for language arts; Standard 3, language for mathematics; Standard 4, language for science; and Standard 5, language for social studies. In addition to these standards, EL staff use the WIDA can-do descriptors. This is a tool that helps us meet our students where they are in their language development. The can-do descriptors, organized according to grade level clusters, highlight what language learners can do at various stages of language development. They help content area teachers and EL teachers engage in conversations about language learning as children and youth move along the continuum of language development. They also help us differentiate instruction and classroom assessment. Finally, they help us advocate for language learners to have equitable access to developmentally appropriate content. Well, how, you might wonder? On this can-do descriptors chart, you can see that there are 6 WIDA levels: entering, emerging, developing, expanding, reaching, and bridging. You will also notice that the 4 modalities of language, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, are listed on the left side. Charting our students' progress according to these areas helps us identify our students' deficits as well as their strengths. Educators from different areas of our students' educational program are able to then discuss each student in detail. For example, you can see here that Alejandro and Guadalupe are strong communicators. This is evident by their WIDA scores in oral language, 5.2 for Alejandro and 4.4 for Guadalupe. But these particular students struggle to express themselves in writing. Here, Alejandro has a WIDA score of 3.5 in writing, and Guadalupe has a score of 2.9. Oftentimes, EL staff will chart each EL student on a can-do chart like this, a very helpful strategy for all educators involved. You might be wondering, how do we know who needs assistance? In other words, how does an EL student enter and exit the program? Well, the identification process begins when the parents bring their child to the district office to enroll them in school. They will have to complete some type of home language questionnaire, answering questions such as, what is your child's main language at home? Or what languages do you speak at home? If there are language present other than English, then the student will take a screener test, likely published by WIDA. This assessment will assist educators in making decisions about whether incoming students would benefit from English language support services. Then, during the course of the student's time in the EL program, additional testing will take place to determine growth and placement. The WIDA model is a suite of English language proficiency assessments for grades K through 12. As a flexible, on-demand language proficiency assessment, WIDA model can be administered at any time during the school year, depending on the needs of the district, school, teacher, or student. These model scores are especially helpful because they can be used to predict student performance on an annual assessment called access testing. Access for ELs is the collective name for WIDA's suite of summative English language proficiency assessments. Access is taken annually by English language learners in kindergarten through grade 12, usually in the spring of each year. How a student progresses through the EL program and when they are ready to exit is largely determined by these assessments. However, teacher recommendation, as well as parent input, can also play a role. Next, who teaches these students? And how do they deliver their content? Well, ELs are taught by a variety of individuals, but primarily by EL and content area teachers. In addition, ELs are taught by music, art, Phy-Ed teachers, volunteers, special education staff, and paraprofessionals. Once again, the particular staffing makeup is dependent on the school or district. Many ELs receive the greater part of their instruction in the general education classroom. There are a variety of instructional approaches that support ELs, including classroom teacher accommodations. This is when a classroom teacher provides more time for an assignment, test, or perhaps adjusts the assignment to fit the needs of the learner. Pull-out or push-in by EL teachers. Typically found in an elementary setting, this is when the EL staff pulls the learner out of the classroom and delivers instruction in a different place, hence pull-out, or when the EL staff stays in the classroom and teaches a student or a small group of students in a corner of the classroom, hence push-in. There's also co-taught classes. This is when a content area teacher and an EL educator teach a course together. The content area teacher focuses on the delivery of the content, and the EL teacher focuses on making the language accessible to the ELs. There are also sheltered content classes. These are content courses taught by content area teachers who only serve as ELs. The courses are typically organized by WIDA level. World History for Level 3-4, or Biology for Level 4, for example. I think it's important for you to know that before the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was passed in 2015, EL teachers used to be able to teach ELA classes for credit. Now it's the ELA staff who must teach these courses. As a result, some schools have the following model. Students take an ELD course alongside an ELA course, oftentimes back-to-back in their schedule. The ELD course, which might be called EL3 or EL4, is taught by an EL teacher for elective credit. In this course, the EL educator teaches the English content to ELs using a modified curriculum. Then the student also takes the ELA course with their native English-speaking peers, taught by the ELA teacher for ELA credit. This double dip of English courses can be extremely helpful to many students. It is, of course, vital that the two teachers work together to meet the unique needs of their EL students. So finally, what additional support do we have as we serve our ELs and their families? Well, many larger districts have what we call bilingual liaisons. These are individuals who help connect our EL families with the complicated and oftentimes overwhelming school system. So what specifically do bilingual liaisons do? A lot. They welcome new families, sometimes accompanying them to the district office to help them register their children for school. They assist with early childhood screenings, special ed assessments, and parent-teacher conferences. They conduct home visits with EL staff and content area teachers to better understand the particular needs of an EL. And bilingual liaisons also organize informational events in the native language to help illuminate certain aspects of the public school system, such as how to access grades and how to support L1 literacy at home. There are also celebratory and cultural events organized by the bilingual liaison to help build community and make connections among the EL population in their school. I want to emphasize that these liaisons should really be native speakers. We know that this is vital to not only understand the language of our students and families, but we must also understand the culture of our families. A native English speaker who is fluent in Spanish or has a Spanish degree is just not the same. Likewise, we must hire liaisons from diverse religious and cultural backgrounds who have an open mind and are accepting of differences. Some schools have reported that certain Orthodox liaisons can impose their particular religious or cultural beliefs on their students and families. It's easy to imagine how this can be uncomfortable and create division. For this reason, EL teachers as well as content area teachers need to be on the ground with recruiting and hiring. I want to encourage you to advocate for appropriate staffing and perhaps try to get on committees for hiring to find the right liaisons for your families and their students. I would like to end this session with a brief story about a home visit which was relayed to me by a colleague. I believe this anecdote brings together much of what we discussed in this session. An EL and content area teacher were both concerned about one of their students, an LTEL, or long-term Somali student, who had been in the system since kindergarten. She was now a freshman in high school and was enrolled in a lot of basic classes, basic math and other rudimentary courses. They could not understand why the student was not progressing through the system. So this team decided to conduct a home visit. In attendance were the EL teacher, the content area teacher, the bilingual liaison, the mom, and the student herself. After some snacks, the mom had prepared quite a spread for this visit, and some chit-chat about schooling, the EL teacher asked the mother, "Has there been anything about your daughter's education that might have made it very difficult for her? Were there any major events when she was younger in regards to her education?" The mom took a deep breath and explained to the bicultural liaison, who then interpreted for the EL and content area teachers, that in their refugee camp in Somalia, the amount of food you received was based on the age of your kids. If you had older kids, you received more food allotments. So like many families, she said that her daughter was in fact 2 years older than her actual age. When they came to the United States then, this information remained the same. She was 5 years old, but her paperwork said she was 7 years old. Since school districts have to follow what is on the paperwork, she was placed in 2nd grade. So, this student missed learning how to read and write, the fundamentals of math, and she lacked a lot of social emotional development and time necessary to function as a 2nd grader. She was swimming upstream for most of her educational career. So, this is what a home visit can do, and this is what you can do for ELs when you understand this intricate system that supports your learners.